Hi, Peter. Great to connect today. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a big honor.
I'm excited to talk about this because this is a topic that I have been trying to learn about and improve on, especially in the last 6 months. So, could you share an experience where you learned something about asking questions and listening that you'd most like to pass on to others?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I just want to say to your earlier comment, the idea that it's something that we need to continually work on. I often find myself in a conversation with my wife where she'll sort of say, "You're not being a very good humble inquirer." And all my first reaction is to say, well, it's one thing to write about it
Yeah.
and to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
It's another thing to be good at practicing it. And so, I kind of two stories come to mind, Nate. The first one is from many, many years ago when I was a young product manager at Silicon Graphics. I was post MBA, so I kind of knew what I was doing, but I was also sort of thought I was kind of a young hotshot in Silicon Valley. And I was working at Silicon Graphics, which is a very progressive company at the time, very important sort of early internet company. And we were working on a early version of a kind of a Web 2.0 services product. And we're in a meeting, and this is a very kind of entrepreneurial and sort of ego-driven company. And so I felt like there was kind of a premium on sort of willful decisiveness, right? So I thought, okay, so we've come to a kind of an impasse, right? We've got a tough product decision to make. And I'm reading the room as this needs a decision. This needs a move. This needs a path forward to avoid sort of too much dithering and hand wringing. We just need to get going and make a decision and move. And what I didn't realize was that what I was doing was, trying to play that product manager role when I should have been playing the listening leader role. What I really needed to be doing was reading the room and trying to get to some collective understanding of how we could make the optimal decision, not a, you know, quick decision to move on. This was not one of those instances where we needed to decide and move. We needed to build a little bit more understanding of what was going on so that we could make a better decision. So I wasn't reading the room right. I wasn't listening to what other people were saying. I had sort of set my own bid on what we needed to do. And again, I thought that there was a premium on decisiveness, and that would be the way to get us through this. What I realized, in the days following, when I got a lot of blowback for this, being too decisive and too willful, is that leading isn't about pushing, right? Leading is at least as much as pushing. It's about pulling. It's about drawing people out. It's about figuring out what they know, because if you realize that half of the room isn't with you, and you didn't inquire, and you didn't try to build some collective understanding, then you're going to end up making decisions that get undermined the next day, the next week, the next month, the next quarter. You don't want to be in a position where you push so hard, you forget to pull people with you. You forget to build that sense of collective understanding, of shared insight, and using that to make better decisions that you can all agree to implement. I was making a decision that I thought was the right path, but I left people turning away and doubting it. And, that's a case where a little bit more listening, a little bit more reading the room, um, and putting off the decision in order to get a little bit better collective understanding of what was going on would have been the better move. Um,
Well, or it's comforting to hear that you struggle with this as well, and that your wife calls you out on it, even though you wrote a book on it, because as I've been trying to do this, I realize how often I fail. And I interviewed Avi Kluger on the podcast a few months back, and he set the goal to become a better listener every day. And he realized pretty quickly that he would mess up so much that he started feeling bad about it. And so what he does now is every time he catches himself not being the listener he wants to be, he just pats himself on the back for at least recognizing and then tries to get better. And so I like that approach of, okay, I can't get mad at myself every time I mess up because it happens too often, but I'll pat myself on the back when I recognize it, and then keep moving forward. This story is interesting to me because I feel like my tendency is to put a premium on decisiveness. I like to move quickly. I don't like to hem and haw.
Yeah.
And so I can really appreciate your perspective on this. And the phrase you used of leading is not just pushing, but it's pulling people along and drying out people's perspectives. I really like that. And it's something that I certainly need to apply, and it will be really hopefully beneficial to me because this is something I struggle with.
Right. Yeah. Well, if I can tell you, Nate, just the other quick story from this year, because I felt like it's another dimension on this similar idea. I was working with a Midwestern company that operates in a bunch of different states. So the broadly the project was about culture and values. And this is, but it's, so it's not a monolithic company. It's a multi-state, multi-function regional company that's got a lot of dimensions to it. And so they're trying to come up with some way of describing their culture and their values so that when they're onboarding new hires or when they're, trying to get people to find some consensus around tough decisions, they have that sense of grounding of who they are as a company, as a culture, what they value, and what's going to carry them forward into the future. And so we were going through a framework that my father and I developed over the last few years about how to kind of build a thick description of an organization's culture as a way of using that to be able to articulate values that can be put into action. And as we were going through this process, I came up with a word to describe what I thought they were talking about. And that kind of sat with the group for a while that I was working with. This was a collection of individuals from different parts of the organization that were created as sort of what we would call a cultural island to give them the safe space in which to kind of share their experience and share the moments in the past that have been particularly influential and illuminating for people experiencing this culture. And so I came up with this word, and I was testing it with people. And at one point, I got some real sort of pushback that they said, "We get why you thought that. The content, associated with that word is correct." But the context, the association that people within our organization will have with that word is all wrong. And the what I realized in that was that I needed to be listening to what they were saying about that word, because the context was a false note. Even if the content, the actual definition of that word might have been correct, the way it was associated, how it felt, was all wrong for them. And the point of this is that as a consultant working with this company, I'm not interpreting their culture. They're interpreting their culture. This has to be what makes sense to them, what's going to make them tick. So for me to sort of propose this idea, and try to impose that as my interpretation of their culture is really all wrong and not going to be helpful. So their pushback, which I of course appreciated, was we get why you might think that, but that's actually not quite right. That's sort of kryptonite for us. If we rephrase it or reposition it with a different word, then we're getting at something that A is contextually safe, contextually accurate, but also something that we can communicate again to a new hire or to other parts of the organization because it fits us. And so it can't be for me what fits as an outsider or observer of them. It has to be what makes sense to them as as experiencing and interpreting their own culture. I like to go back to Clifford Geertz, the social anthropologist from the 80s, 70s, 80s, would say that the trick is to figure out what the devil they think they're up to. And so much of the time as a consultant, we come up with our own framework, we come up with our own idea, we come up with our own interpretation, but it kind of doesn't matter. We have to hold that in. We have to keep asking them. We have to keep testing whether that works because in the end, it's what they think they're up to, not what I think they're up to. So again, how do we use humble inquiry to sort of draw them out, to get them to tell us how, yes, part of what you're asking is accurate, but a lot of it's not, because it's in their interpreting those differences and they're internalizing those distinctions that they will learn about their culture. And they learning about their culture is far more important than me learning about their culture.
Very interesting. It reminds me of something I heard Mac Brown say, the football coach, UT Austin, North Carolina. He
Hmm.
said, as a coach, it's not what you say, it's what they hear that matters.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I like your approach of taking a humble approach and trying to really understand where they're coming from rather than impose kind of your own definition, values, ideas on them. Which leads me to another question.
Hmm.
When what is the most common mistake, or what is a common mistake people make when they try to use humble inquiry? Or
Well,
what is the most common mistake people make when they don't use humble inquiry?
yeah. Well, humble inquiry sort of has two main objectives. And again, I hate to be sort of reductive because it's really a philosophy about how to get along and gather information and build relationships. But if we want to think of it in two simple terms, the first one is how do you gather the most information to make the best decisions? And so the point of about here with humble inquiry is that um, you have to be asking questions that you don't know the answer to, because your goal is to broaden the information set that you can make decisions with. So the idea that you kind of have an idea and you start asking questions that are either reinforcing advice that you want to give or are kind of leading the witness because you think you've figured it out and you just want them to get to where you are. Those are two of the sort of fundamental flaws with humble inquiry that we're trying to get at with humble inquiry. That if you start betraying too much of what you know and not drawing out what they know, you end up at these like there's sort of the classic moment of truth, which is that you get to a point where you say to somebody, um, well, if you did this, this might work. And they say, oh, well, thanks for that advice. I tried that last week and it didn't work.
Mhm.
And you realize that you didn't ask them, you didn't draw them out enough. You didn't ask them enough questions so that you knew that that advice wasn't going to be pertinent. You need to ask enough questions so that you know when not to weigh in with your own advice. It's so tempting. We're so trained to want to offer our advice, but it's a trap. Just like, Michael Bungay Stanier says, it's a trap to think that you know enough to advise somebody in that sense. The other thing with humble inquiry is to recognize that your goal is to deepen the openness and trust that you have with other people, so that it's not just about drawing people out to, you know, build a broader set of information with which to make this decision, but it's to build a substrate of openness and trust with which to make many subsequent decisions. You build that rapport and that trust that will make it easier for you to make other difficult decisions down the road. So it's information gathering and it's relationship building. And the problem on the relationship building side is that if you're not genuine and authentic and vulnerable, humans have a very good radar for that. We know when people are bullshitting us. And so one of the tricky things with humble inquiry is to have it really come from you, come from the heart, to have it be genuine curiosity, really truly asking questions that you don't know the answer to. And if you just keep with that sort of reminder, I know the answer to this, and I want this person to respond to it, but you have to say, but that's not going to help. I need to be asking them things that I don't know the answer to, because A, I'll learn more, and B, I'll communicate genuine curiosity. I won't communicate that I'm about to plow in with some advice or that I'm leading the witness. I will communicate to them that I'm vulnerable to what I don't know, and I'm curious to draw out what they know so that we both end up in a better place.
Okay, so I'm so intrigued, and I just think it's so great to focus on asking questions we don't know the answer to so that we're not leading people, genuine curiosity, because it's so easy for us, like you said, to just try to tell people what to do. And what I read in your book is when every time we just jump in and we tell people what to do, what we're implying is we're smarter than you. You don't know the answer and we do. So here, let me
Right.
tell you what to do because I'm smarter than you. So there
Yeah.
is an assumption built into that every time we tell people what to do that we're smarter. And then I love this second aspect of it is humble inquiry is about asking questions we don't know the answer to, always remembering that this is about building relationships. So I really
Yeah.
like that approach because it's easy for me, us, I think, to just go around offering solutions. And if our goal is to provide everybody with solutions, then we're in that frame of I'm smarter than you.
Yeah.
And so I really like the approach of ask questions we don't know the answers to and build relationships. And through this process, hopefully together, they can solve their problem. We together can solve the problem, but it's not a top down situation. And the relationship will grow if we use this approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, down the road we're humans, and that's where in the future we thrive, especially now when we're realizing that generative AI is so capable at, creating certainly a decision or a body of advice. It may not be exactly correct. It's getting better and better and better at doing that. But at the end of the day, we are still humans who are going to feed off our own energy and our own curiosity, um, so that the next opportunity or challenge that comes along, we will be better at interpreting and adapting to situations than a very, big, large language model will be. Because, again, it's not just about content. Humans make decisions around content and context.
Yeah.
And humble inquiry is about making sure that you're tapped into the context of what's going on, not just the content that you need to make a decision.
Well, Peter, this is so great. You've given me a lot to think about and more ways that I can try to improve. Any final things you'd like to share as we wrap up here?
Uh, you're doing a great job. I love the way that you're sort of probing in all sorts of different directions. As I mentioned, I've professor friends and colleagues in your list, and I think it just represents a great body of work uh, to to go at these tricky things. Humans and organizations were very complicated, and you're going at it from a bunch of different angles, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I was just thinking that as I started this podcast, it was about sharing lessons with my kids that I most wanted to pass on.
Hmm.
And they were coming, things I'd learned, not all from me, of course. I don't know if I've ever had an original idea, but just the best that I'd learned, I wanted to share with them. And I feel like it has turned into is a podcast where I ask people questions, where I'm trying to learn. So hopefully, yes, I am applying the humble inquiry approach, and now I have a better framework to do that. Thanks to this interview and to the book, which I am working my way through, and I just love it. So, Peter, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.